Welcome back to my dialing in series. Today I'm actually going to look at an effects block that I've done a previous dialing in video for, but I'm going to do a real twist on it and use it in a very different manner. A few weeks back I was taking a look at some of the legacy effects, and I took a look at using the tube comp, the legacy tube comp, more as a clean boost or an overdrive pedal in front of an amp. And it got me thinking, how about we try doing the same thing with the LA Studio comp, which is a favorite of mine. Anybody who watches my channel knows that I use the LA Studio comp at the end of all of my presets just to give it a little tiny bit of glue, but in a very subtle way. And that being a more traditional way to use it. But I thought, how much fun would it be to throw it in front of an amp and not even use it just for subtle compression, but use it to drive the front of that amp harder. So I have two amp setups today that we're going to do just that with. So let's go over to Helix Native inside of Cubase to take a look at this. Now you'll see I have a little setup here with two paths basically. I have one snapshot that's called Fender, one snapshot that's called Friedman. The Fender snapshot, I'm just going to turn the LA Studio comp off here, is the US Princess amp with these settings, and that's going through the 110 US Princess stock cab with a 160 ribbon mic on it. Then I have snapshot 2, which is the Placator clean amp with these settings, going through a 412 greenback 25 with a 160 ribbon, 4.5 inches back. And I have it going through a touch of delay and reverb just to give it a little bit of life. So if we go over to the Fender sound, I also have the LA Studio comp. Now one of the reasons I'm using Helix Native here is so that you can see the gain reduction meter up on the screen, which will help you to kind of see what's actually happening within the compressor. But if we take these two sounds without the LA Studio comp on, here's what we have. All right, and if I go over to the Placator clean, I have a slightly different type of tone. So both decent little clean sounds. I didn't really work much on them. I kind of just got them set up very quickly. Now, let's go over to the Fender Toner. We're going to pull up the LA Studio comp. Now, the way I want to use this in here is more as like I mentioned, a clean boost or an overdrive pedal to really hit the front of that amp. So what we can do is we have peak reduction and gain. Now the peak reduction is going to, as we bring it up higher, is going to bring in more compression. So we're going to see the gain reduction meter kind of squash the sound. If I have this just at zero, everything at zero like this, we don't even get any sound until I bring in some gain. Now, if I was to turn that off, it's really not changing things in a dramatic fashion. Now, if I was to crank this gain up though, it's going to do a couple things. It's obviously going to feed more level into the front of the amp, which I could also do with the level control down here. Therefore, the amp is going to start breaking up more. But there's something else that happens with the gain control. The LA Studio comp is a tube compressor, so the harder that we push that gain, the more it's going to hit that tube, the modeled tube, right, that we have in Helix and Helix Native, and it's going to have its own distortion characteristics. So as I bring that gain control up, you will hear it start to hit the front of the amp and bring its own characteristics in. What a beautiful tone just by bringing that gain control up. Now, if we go all the way with it, hopefully we're not going to drive this too much. turn that off, we go back to our clean. So we see that this is capable of adding a very interesting overdrive to the sound. So let's bring this up maybe to where it's just hitting in a nice manner. Up around 7, that's kind of nice. Now what happens when we bring the peak reduction in? So we bring it up to 5. We don't really see the gain reduction meters moving. Let's bring it up to 6. Still nothing. We'll move it up till we get a little bit of gain reduction coming out of it. There we go. Now we're getting somewhere in the tune of a couple dB of gain reduction. So you hear a real different character of the sound with the peak reduction off, or bringing it in so we have some gain reduction. You can hear the compressor kind of squash, and this is what I kind of really liked about using either the tube comp or the LA Studio comp for this purpose, is we can kind of take what a normal overdrive pedal couldn't do, which is really control the dynamics as well and add some of that squish to it, and be able to control how much of that we get. What happens if we bring that peak reduction all the way up to 10? You'll notice it really smooths the sound out, so it's really neat. We can add in a fair amount of drive here, and then really smooth it out with the peak reduction. So a very different sound, a lot of possibilities here. We could bring the gain down and keep the peak reduction up more. Comparing that to it with the LA Studio comp off. Obviously acting more as a real squashy compressor there, but as we bring that gain up, not really breaking the amp up as much, but still changing that tone in a pretty dramatic fashion. So if we bring these back to more reasonable settings, some really neat stuff. Now another thing we can do if we get to some pretty dramatic settings here, let's maybe keep the peak reduction around there. We'll crank this up. We can use the mix control here. If we bring this down to 50%, we blend in some of the original unaffected signal, which has kind of a nice effect to it. So really nice possibilities. Now, how does this sound when I go over to a different sounding amp model like the Friedman? All right, let's turn that on with these settings. You'll hear how the overdrive kind of takes on the characteristics of the new amp model and stock cab or IR that you're using, right? So again, we can mess around with this in different places. Again, we could go really extreme with these. Could use that mix control. So a lot of possibilities here. From just taking the front end of an amp model we're using, boosting it a little bit to get a little bit of hair on it, all the way up to really pushing it to some searing leads where we can mix in some of the peak reduction, get more compression, smooth the tone out. So lots of flexibility and lots of possibilities, especially using that mix control where we can blend in some of our original signal. So I thought that was going to be a pretty fun one to mess with and hopefully spark some ideas for some of you folks who maybe wouldn't have thought of using it in this manner. So we do have that legacy tube comp. I believe it was just 2 controls on that. But now using the LA Studio comp, we have a few more tools that we can actually kind of mess around a little bit more and fine tune our tone. So if that's something that you like the sound of, obviously it's going to sound different depending on the amp model you use it with. Using it with the Fender style amp, it took on the characteristics of that amp. Using it with sort of more of a Marshall style amp, it's going to take on those characteristics. So try it out, experiment with it, and try different things and see if you can maybe come up with a new tool in your toolbox to craft your tones to get them closer to maybe what you're hearing in your head, or even just to inspire a new idea, which is really what it's all about as far as I'm concerned. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed that. Please like the video, share it with anybody who you think would get some enjoyment out of watching it or some benefit from watching it, and subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell notification to get notified when I put new content out. I'll be back really soon with some more. Thanks so much again for tuning in. Ciao for now.